It is incredible how, as soon as a people becomes subject, it promptly falls into such complete forgetfulness of its freedom that it can hardly be roused to the point of regaining it, obeying so easily and so willingly that one is led to say, on beholding such a situation, that this people has not so much lost its liberty as won its enslavement. It is true that in the beginning men submit under constraint and by force, but those who come after them obey without regret and perform willingly what their predecessors had done because they had to. This is why men born under the yoke and then nourished and reared in slavery are content, without further effort, to live in their native circumstance, unaware of any other state or right, and considering as quite natural the condition into which they were born. This is, however, no ire so spendthrift or indifferent that he does not sometimes scan the account books of his father in order to see if he is enjoying all the privileges of his legacy, or whether, perchance, his rights and those of his predecessor have not been encroached upon. Nevertheless, it is clear enough that the powerful influence of custom is in no respect more compelling than in this, namely, habituation to subjection. It is said that Mithridates trained himself to drink poison. Like him, we learn to swallow, and not to find bitter, the venom of servitude. It cannot be denied that nature is influential in shaping us to her will and making us reveal our rich or meager endowment. Yet it must be admitted that she has less power over us than custom, for the reason that native endowment, no matter how good, is dissipated unless encouraged, whereas environment always shapes us in its own way, whatever that may be, in spite of nature's gifts. The good seed that nature plants in us is so slight and so slippery that it cannot withstand the least harm from wrong nourishment. It flourishes less easily, becomes spoiled, withers, and comes to nothing. Fruit trees retain their own particular quality if permitted to grow undisturbed, but lose it promptly and bear strange fruit not their own when engrafted. Every herb has its peculiar characteristics, its virtues and properties. Yet frost weathers soil, or the gardener's hand increase or diminish its strength. The plant seen one spot cannot be recognized in another. Whoever could have observed the early Venetians, a handful of people living so freely that the most wicked among them would not wish to be king over them, so born and trained that they would not vie with one another except as to which one could give the best counsel and nurture their liberty most carefully, so instructed and developed from their cradles that they would not exchange for all the other delights of the world an iota of their freedom, who, I say, familiar with the original nature of such a people, could visit today the territories of the man known as the Great Dog, and there contemplates with composure a people unwilling to live except to serve him, and maintaining his power at the cost of their lives. Who would believe that these two groups of people had an identical origin? Would one not rather conclude that upon leaving a city of men, he had chanced upon a vinegar of breasts of beasts? Lycurgus, the lawgiver of Sparta, is reported to have reared 2 dogs of the same litter by fattening one in the kitchen and training the other in the fields to the sound of the bugle and the horn, thereby to demonstrate to the Lacedaemonians that men too develop according to their early habits. He set the two dogs in the open market-place, and between them he placed a bowl of soup and hare. One ran to the bowl of soup, the other to the hare. Yet they were, as he maintained, born brothers of the same parents. In such manner did this leader, by his laws and customs, shape and instruct the Spartans, so well that any one of them would sooner have died than acknowledge any sovereign other than law and reason. It gives me pleasure to recall a conversation of the olden time between one of the favorites of Xerxes, the great king of Persia, and two Lacedaemonians. When Xerxes equipped his great army to conquer Greece, he sent his ambassadors into the Greek cities to ask for water and earth. That was the procedure the Persians adopted in summoning the cities to surrender, neither to Athens nor to Sparta. However, did he dispatch such messengers, because those who had been sent there by Darius his father had been thrown by the Athenians and Spartans, some into ditches, and others into wells, with the invitation to help themselves freely there to water the soil, and soil to take back to their prince. Those Greeks could not permit even the slightest suggestion of encroachment upon their liberty. The Spartans suspected, nevertheless, that they had incurred the wrath of the gods by their action, and especially the wrath of Talthybios, the god of the heralds. In order to appease him, they decided to send Xerxes two of their citizens in atonement for the cruel death inflicted upon the ambassadors of his father. Two Spartans, one named Sperte and the other Bulis, volunteered to offer themselves as a sacrifice. So they departed, and on the way they came to the palace of the Persian named Hydarnes, lieutenant of the king in all the Asiatic cities situated on the sea coasts. He received them with great honor, feasted them, and then, speaking of one thing and another, he asked them why they refused so obdurately his king's friendship. Consider well, O Spartans, said he, and realize by my example that the king knows how to honor those who are worthy, and believe that if you were his men, he would do the same for you. If you belonged to him, and he had known you, there is not one among you who might not be the lord of some Greek city. By such words, Hydarnes, you give us no good counsel, replied the Lacedaemonians, because you have experienced merely the advantage of which you speak. You do not know the privilege we enjoy. You have the honor of the king's favor, but you know nothing about liberty, what relish it has and how sweet it is. For if you had any knowledge of it, you yourself would advise us to defend it, not with lance and shield, but with our very teeth and nails. Only Spartans could give such an answer, and surely both of them spoke as they had been trained. It was impossible for the Persian to regret liberty not having known it, nor for the Lacedaemonians to find subjection acceptable after having enjoyed freedom. Cato the Utican, while still a child under the rod, could come and go in the house of Sylla, the despot. Because of the family and place of his origin, and because he and Sylla were close relatives, the door was never closed to him. He always had his teacher with him when he went there, as was the custom for children of noble birth. He noticed that in the house of Sylla, in the dictator's presence or at his command, some men were imprisoned and others sentenced. One was banished, another was strangled, one demanded the goods of another citizen, another his head, in short. All went there, not as to the house of a city magistrate, but as to the people's tyrant. And this was therefore not a court of justice, but rather a resort of tyranny. Whereupon the young lad said to his teacher, "Why don't you give me a dagger? I will hide it under my robe. I often go into Sylla's room before he is risen, and my arm is strong enough to rid the city of him. There is a speech truly characteristic of Cato. It was a true beginning of this hero so worthy of his end. And should one not mention his name or his country, but state merely the fact as it is, the episode itself would speak eloquently, and anyone would divine that he was a Roman born in Rome at the time when she was free. And why all this? Certainly not because I believe that the land or the region has anything to do with it. For in any place and in any climate, subjection is bitter, and to be free is pleasant. But merely because I am of the opinion that one should pity those who at birth arrive with the yoke upon their necks. We should exonerate and forgive them, since they have not seen even the shadow of liberty, and being quite unaware of it, cannot perceive the evil endured through their own slavery. If there were actually a country like that of the Cimmerians mentioned by Homer, where the sun shines otherwise than on our own, shedding its radiance steadily for 6 successive months, and then leaving humanity to drowse in obscurity until it returns at the end of another half-year, should we be surprised to learn that those born during this long night do grow so accustomed to their native darkness that unless they were told about the sun, they would have no desire to see the light. One never pines for what he has never known. Longing comes only after enjoyment, and constitutes amidst the experience of sorrow the memory of past joy. It is truly the nature of man to be free, and to wish to be so, yet his character is such that he instinctively follows the tendencies that his training gives him. Let us therefore admit that all those things to which he is trained and accustomed seem natural to man, and that only that is truly native to him which he receives with his primitive, untrained individuality. Thus, custom becomes the first reason for voluntary servitude. Men are like handsome race horses, whose first bite the bit and later like it, are rearing under the saddle, a while soon learn to enjoy displaying their harness, and prance proudly beneath their trappings. Similarly, men will grow accustomed to the idea that they have always been in subjection, that their fathers lived in the same way. They will think they are obliged to suffer this way, and will persuade themselves by example and imitation of others, finally investing those who order them around with proprietary rights based on the idea that it has always been that way. There are always a few better endowed than others, who feel the weight of the yoke and cannot restrain themselves from attempting to shake it off. These are the men who never become tamed under subjection, and who always, like Ulysses on land and sea, constantly seeking the smoke of his chimney, cannot prevent themselves from peering about for their natural privileges and from remembering their ancestors and their former ways. These are in fact the men who, possessed of clear minds and far-sighted spirit, are not satisfied, like the brutish mass, to see only what is at their feet, but rather look about them behind and before, and even recall the things of the past in order to judge those of the future, and compare both with their present condition. These are the ones who, having good minds of their own, have further trained them by study and learning. Even if liberty had entirely perished from the earth, such men would invent it. For them, slavery has no satisfactions, no matter how well disguised. The Grand Turk as well was well aware that books and teaching more than anything else give men the sense to comprehend their own nature and to detest tyranny. I understand that in his territory there are few educated people, for he does not want many. On account of this restriction, men of strong zeal and devotion, who in spite of the passing of time have preserved their love of freedom, still remain ineffective because, however numerous they may be, they are not known to one another. Under the tyrant they have lost freedom of action, of speech, and almost of thought. They are alone in their aspiration. Indeed, Momus, god of mockery, was not merely joking when he found this to criticize in the man fashioned by Vulcan, namely, that the Maker had not set a little window in his creature's heart to render his thoughts visible. It is reported that Brutus, Cassius, and Casca, on undertaking to free Rome, and for that matter the whole world, refused to include in their band Cicero, that great enthusiast for the public welfare, if ever there was one, because they considered his heart too timid for such a lofty deed. They trusted his willingness, but they were none too sure of his courage. Yet whoever studies the deeds of earlier days and the annals of antiquity will find practically no instance of heroes who failed to deliver their country from evil hands, when they set about their task with a firm, wholehearted, and sincere intention. Liberty, as if to reveal her nature, seems to have given them new strength. Harmodius and Aristogiton, Thrasybulus, Brutus, and elder Valerianus and Dion achieved successfully what they planned virtuously, for hardly ever does good fortune fail a strong will. Brutus the younger and Cassius were successful in eliminating servitude, and although they perished in their attempt to restore liberty, they did not die miserably. What blasphemy it would be to say there was anything miserable about these men, either in their death or in their living. Their loss worked great harm, everlasting misfortune, and complete destruction of the Republic, which appears to have been buried with them. Other and later undertakings against the Roman emperors were merely plottings of ambitious people, who deserve no pity for the misfortunes that overtook them, for it is evident that they sought not to destroy, but merely to usurp the crown, scheming to drive away the tyrant, but to retain tyranny. For myself, I could not wish such men to prosper, and I am glad they have shown by their example that the sacred name of liberty must never be used to cover a false enterprise. But to come back to the thread of our discourse, which I have practically lost, the essential reason why men take orders willingly is that they are born serfs and are reared as such. From this cause there follows another result, namely that people easily become cowardly and submissive under tyrants. For this observation I am deeply grateful to Hippocrates, the renowned father of medicine, who noted and reported it in a treatise of his entitled Concerning Diseases. This famous man was certainly endowed with a great heart, and proved it clearly by his reply to the great king, who wanted to attach him to his person by means of special privileges and large gifts. Hippocrates answered frankly that it would be a weight on his conscience to make use of his science for the cure of barbarians who wished to slay his fellow Greeks, or to serve faithfully by his skill anyone who undertook to enslave Greece. This letter he sent the king can still be read among his other works, and will forever testify to his great heart and noble character. By this time it should be evident that liberty once lost, valor also perishes. A subject people shows neither gladness nor eagerness in combat. Its men march sullenly to danger, almost as if in bonds, and stultified They do not feel throbbing within them that eagerness for liberty which engenders scorn of peril, and imparts readiness to acquire honor and glory by a brave death amidst one's comrades. Among free men there is a competition as to who will do most, each for the common good, each by himself, all expecting to share in the misfortunes of defeat or in the benefits of victory. But an enslaved people loses, in addition to his warlike courage, all signs of enthusiasm, for their hearts are degraded, submissive and incapable of any great deed. Tyrants are well aware of this, and in order to degrade their subjects further, encourage them to assume this attitude and make it instinctive.